Hi everyone, welcome to this module where we'll look at globalization and food. We've got a couple of readings today, a little bit dated, and they take two separate approaches to really looking at how food has become globalized. The first reading is about papaya, and the interesting sort of approach that this one takes is one of following the object, right, following the product. And so it's papayas, and so the idea is to look at where is the papaya being produced, where is it being consumed, and how does it get between those two places, and what do each of the steps along the road sort of look like? What sort of people are working there, right? And the goal of this article is really to connect people that don't realize that they're connected, right? Connect them through this product, right? Through papaya. So it's an interesting one. Again, it's an interesting approach. In the way that I've outlined, but also it's quite interesting because it's sort of focused on people here, right? So it's talking, you'll get a lot fewer facts and figures and sort of systemic kinds of data in this one, and much more sort of personal accounts, right, of people's relationships to the papaya and through the papaya to one another. So you'll see papaya producers, the farmers, the people who work on the farms, as well as the people that sort of own and manage the farms, and then on to those who are buying those papaya for supermarkets in the UK, and then also the people who then are consuming the papayas. So that's an interesting one. And again, it's about globalization. If we sort of think about apertura, right, in the ethnoscapes and the technoscapes, the types of technologies that's used, and I guess the places that get connected together. And this is something that I think is particularly strong in this first papaya reading, right? It's there's a discussion there about places and about how those places are connected, and about people and how those people are connected. It also gets into a little bit of the sort of history of globalization in terms of those places, right? And so the spread of capitalism, the spread of international trade right around the world, and what that meant for Jamaica, and what changes have occurred, right, in places like Jamaica, where agricultural production for export have been an important part of the economy, those places have been an important part of the economy, of the global economy for hundreds of years, and how have they changed, or how haven't they changed? Actually, so that'll be an interesting read there. What I'm looking for you to get out of it is, again, sort of a picture of how food connects the world in globalization, but also, I mean, when we start talking about the consumer, that's really where culture, I think, comes in. I think. At least this is where the article starts talking more about culture, and that's an interesting thing in itself, right? Is that what's the consumer buying when the consumer in this article is called Emma. It's a particular person, right? As is all of these the people at all the different stages of sort of production and transportation and retail of this product. Focus on individual people. So it's Emma living in London, in North London in particular. What's she buying? Like when she's buying the papaya, what does the papaya mean? And you'll see that part of it is a way to connect with foreign cultures, right? And so this new market, again, according to Emma, right, her grandmother would never have considered the option of even eating pasta, right? And so the changing diet, the changing products that are available through globalization, but the demand for those products, right? So it's not just a matter of supply of getting, or supply chain, right, of getting those products across the world more easily, but it's also the demand, and like, why are people, why is a young professional woman living in a flat in North London, why is she buying a papaya in the first place, right? And part of the answer there is the expectation that through eating this papaya that she can connect herself with some culture from far away, right? So culture is not very far away at all from this reading, although it's really not until the very end, right, when we start talking about the consumer, that much discussion happens around culture, I would say, at least overtly. And so part of the challenge perhaps for you is then knowing that that's coming, knowing that culture is coming sort of towards the end. Well, can you find it earlier on? And so that's sort of a challenge for you. But I was definitely fascinated by this idea of seeking to experience faraway cultures, right? So we can do that through travel and through food. And so it talks about Emma going out to restaurants with her friends, going out to her friend, I think, going out to an Afghan restaurant, and how those restaurants then feed a dry, sort of create a demand for these exotic products, right, that you wouldn't normally have found or wouldn't have found in prior generations in British supermarkets. Also travel, right? So Emma's well traveled. So she talks about eating lobster in Maine, for example. It's a way to sort of connect with those cultures that you have perhaps traveled to on holiday and enjoyed, right? And that's one, and you'll see that, actually, you will see that earlier on in the reading when, there's some, the producer of the farm that's spotlighted in this reading is in Jamaica. And there's something about the made in Jamaica, right? There's something about the location, right? The fact that it has a good reputation, the fact that it has an exotic feel, right? A certain image of it, whether that image is real or not, but it's somewhere that people want to go on their holidays, right, on vacation, and so it's somewhere that you want to connect with, and one way you can do that is buying papaya that's come from there. 90%, you'll see 90% of the European market for papayas, or the 90% of the papayas that are consumed in Europe, right, come from Brazil, right? And so you'll see in the reading a couple of reasons why Jamaica has a sort of a competitive advantage over Brazil. At least that's the idea from this particular farmer, right, who's farming papaya in Jamaica. But part of it is this, you'll see other parts as well, but part of it is this idea of this image of Jamaica. And then when you see Emma sort of buying that papaya as a means to connect with a particular culture, so that's interesting from a cultural perspective. Another interesting fact from a cultural perspective, especially when we think about Emma consuming this papaya, is that there's actually some sort of measure of authenticity, where eating crab cakes that you bought from the supermarket is not the same as eating crabs on a beach in Australia, right? Which is what I think that's her ambition. I don't think she's done that one yet, but that's one of the things she'd like to do. So, it's like, hey, I'm in England, I can connect with these other cultures, but not in a fully authentic way, not as if I was it's not quite as good. It's a substitute for, but it's not as good as being in that place, eating lobster in New England, right? Or eating crabs in Australia, or going to Thailand, right? And eating Thai food there. I know it's not the same. I know you can't recreate we can't recreate the culture in full authenticity, but we can buy something that's an analog of that and enjoy it at home. So, and when we think of culture like that, right, and when we think of it in the way that Emma's thinking of it, then we can kind of connect elements of globalization into culture, right? So the ease of travel, right? The cheaper flights, right? The opening up of all kinds of parts of the world for travel that previously weren't, right? There was a time, of course, and we'll talk about Emma in London, but there was a time, of course, let's say 100 or 150 years ago, where people's vacations were spent in England, right? I come from a town called Hartlepool, and there's a small village on the sea, on the beach. It's sort of been incorporated now into that town, into Hartlepool, but it's probably a mile or two down the road, down the coast, which was a big tourist destination. Well, Hartlepool itself was perhaps a tourist destination in the 19th century, right? Much less so now. When people from the big cities and workers in England went on vacation to seaside resorts in the same country, right? And then it sort of grew then to be, well, the weather's not great here, but hey, now we can get across to Spain relatively quickly, right? Spain and perhaps Greece as well, on planes, right? That are becoming more and more affordable, right? And more, of course, 150 years ago, you weren't going anywhere on a plane. But from the 1950s, right? So maybe like 80 years or 100 years ago, it is the beginning of air travel, and then certainly through the 70s and 80s, it becomes much more accessible to all sorts of people. And package holidays in Spain become the norm, and perhaps in Greece as well. And then, more recently, right, with low-cost airlines, there's all sorts of places now that you can get to, and people are going further and further afield. They're having more and more money, and it's getting easier and easier to travel, right? So those connections now are creating tastes and desires to encounter cultures that are further and further from home, and to recreate those experiences. And it's not hard from there, though. This is a step or two away now from the paper, but it's not too hard to think of other ways that we would get cultural information from far away. The sorts of books or movies, and we've covered movies already in this semester. That we want to, we're exposed to things that we wouldn't have otherwise been exposed to through movies and other media, right, through the internet perhaps as well. That then creates a demand for those items, and those might be food items, right? And oftentimes that they are, and so that's what the papaya paper is about. The second paper is I think a paper that you'd be more, at least for me, I suppose, that you'd be more likely anticipating from this sort of a course when we talk about food, and it's particularly talking about transnational corporations and their impact on food. And again, though, I chose a paper that talks about impact on food in a particular place. Right? So it talks about transnational corporations and the effect that they have on dairy production in Mexico, in particular in La Laguna, Mexico, which has become an industrialized and heavy producer of milk and dairy products in Mexico. And so this paper, again, it's a little bit more sort of in the type of academic paper that you'll probably expect, where you'll find an overview first of all of what globalization is, and so that's always good, right, to connect it back in to the main theme of the course. And so it does that. Then it talks about particularly dairy production in the world, what globalization means in terms of who imports dairy products, right, and who exports dairy products. And so you'll see some of that. Those countries that are self-sufficient and that have then extra for export, why is that the case, right? And you'll see a lot of it is about technology. Right? So you'll see quite a lot of talk about technology in production and just making production more efficient, right? And then the spread of that. I mean, this you could definitely use elements of this paper, especially this particular element you could use to sort of bolster an argument about modernization. And the globalization is simply spreading. It's the sort of the spread of technology around the world, the spread of efficient technology that increases and improves production. In this case of dairy products, but of course, globalization is happening in all sorts of areas, and it's spreading that technology around the world and giving access to to this technology to all sorts of people that didn't have it in the past. Well, and of course, it's also encouraging the development of further technology, right? Would also be the argument that I think you could make from this paper if you wanted to. So it talks about that, and then it starts to talk particularly about La Laguna, and it talks about different types of producers. And well, and first of all, you're going to learn a lot about the dairy industry here, right? If you don't already know about the sort of production chain, the sort of the inputs in to the dairy industry in terms of food for the cattle, and also things like genetics, treatments, and the livestock themselves, through the actual sort of the production on the farm, right, that we might first think of, right, and certainly in this paper, it's the sort of the center of what the paper is talking about in terms of the production, right. So you've got the sort of, it talks about backwards articulation and forwards articulation, right, and the backwards and forwards articulation is from the actual, I keep saying actual production, but that's not very descriptive, and that's what I'm trying to explain a little bit better. But you've got the part of the process where you've got a cow, right, and you've got some means to get the milk out of the cow into some sort of a storage container, right. That's the sort of center for this paper, and then everything that happens before that in terms of feeding the cow, right, getting the cow in the first place, and you'll see a lot of the cows are being imported from North America, from the USA and Canada in particular, are being imported into there. But you'll see as well the balanced feeds. And that sort of technology, and who runs that, right? What types of companies, what types of businesses control that sort of forward articulation, right? To get the cow into that position where the milk's coming out of it, including technology and that sort of thing to milk the cows. And then the forwards articulation is, okay, now once we've got the milk out of the cow, now where's it going and how's it getting to the places that it's going to? Right, they call it the sort of industrialization, I think, of the milk, right, where it stops becoming like the sort of product of a cow and starts becoming an industrial product, right, and it goes off to factories, and either it's processed, well, it's always processed, but either as sort of liquid milk that's then sold or made into yogurts and cheeses and that sort of thing, and who controls that part of the process. And what you'll see is, I think, an interesting fact where certainly the spread of technology and how technology spreads, and sort of the central, this is giving quite a lot away, I think, but the central sort of theme in terms of how it is, how technology is integrated, is you have like 3 different kinds of farms in this area, right? You've got farms that are sort of small, farms that are family owned, right, by individual families, and they're fairly small. You've got another a class of dairy farm in La Laguna, where it's was encouraged in the 1970s by the Mexican government, and the sort of collectively owned farms that are a little bit bigger. The technology that they're using oftentimes is not, at least in the beginning, right, of the process, is not, it's not the latest technology. It's fairly common technologies. It's not the most advanced technologies. And then you've got the larger farms at the top, right, that are larger, that are owned by bigger corporations or bigger industrial concerns, and that are using and integrating the most modern technology. And and the point of the paper, so as I said, I'm giving quite a lot away, is that the buyers of the milk, the people who are taking the milk from the producers, right, from these farms, they don't worry, to be honest, which farm it's coming from, right? They'll do business with any farm that's producing milk, it says. But of course, the milk has to be of a certain quality. It has to be stored in a certain way, right? So those who are buying the milk now they say, yeah, we're going to buy anybody's milk that wants to sell it to us, but here's our stipulations, right? And so it's that dynamic, right, that allows transnational corporations to sort of drive the production of milk in a certain direction and implement certain technologies. Right? Because if we're asking for the milk to be in a certain way, to be presented in a certain way, to be stored in a certain way, then those who are doing it that way, their milk gets purchased, right? And those that don't do it in that way, their milk doesn't get purchased, right? And one of the reasons, and this is another big thing from the paper, right? One of the reasons why the small family farms can manage in that sort of environment without being able themselves to implement those more technologically advanced methods that they would use at the bigger farms is by organizing themselves horizontally into associations and in sharing some of the technology, sharing some of the resources, right, the technological resources that otherwise, if they were on their own, they likely wouldn't have access to, wouldn't be able to afford access to. And so again, it's talking about globalization, the globalization of culture, this time in terms of food production. Food, I think, is a cultural item anyway, right? But how is it produced? Who's producing it? Where is it produced? And is enough of it being produced? And how is the fact that it's now a globalized process, how has that affected the production? And so that's what that paper's about. I think you'll find that one interesting as well, although a little bit probably more technical, a little bit less personal than the papaya one, which was also interesting. So I'm going to leave you there, having sort of outlined the themes in the two papers and sort of talked about them a little bit and what I hope that you'll get out of them. There's obviously quite a bit of detail in there that I haven't discussed, because always my assumption is that you're doing the reading. And so while I do want to give you a sort of a purchase point, like somewhere to sort of grab onto in the reading, you know, I don't want to just do the reading for you. I don't want to just sort of recant everything in the reading. Yeah, hopefully again that gives you somewhere to grab onto the readings, and hopefully you'll enjoy those this week again. And I will look forward to reading your questions and that sort of thing.